Have you ever witnessed a moment when someone you barely know steps up to defend the innocent, risking everything for a stranger? Those moments reveal who people truly are beneath the surface. Sometimes those moments change everything. Where are you watching from tonight? Drop a comment and let me know what state or country you're in, because this story about unexpected heroes might just remind you that courage shows up in the most ordinary places. Sophia-chan wiped down the sticky table for the third time, her lower back aching from the 12-hour shift that was nowhere near over. At 24, she had perfected the art of moving efficiently through Romano's family restaurant, even when exhaustion threatened to buckle her knees. The dinner rush had been brutal, and her sneakers squeaked against the checkered linoleum as she balanced 3 plates on her left arm while refilling water glasses with her right. The tips tonight had been decent, which meant she might actually make her mother's medical payment this month without having to choose between groceries and utilities. The thought of her mother lying in that hospital bed, tubes snaking from her frail arms, pushed Sophia to move faster despite her burning feet. 3 more tables, she told herself. Just 3 more tables and she could take a 5-minute break. She had just finished delivering plates of spaghetti and meatballs to table 12 when she noticed them in the corner booth. The man was impossible to miss, even in a restaurant full of families and couples. He sat with perfect posture, his charcoal suit tailored to fit his broad shoulders and tall frame exactly. Everything about him screamed money and power, from his precisely styled dark hair to the expensive watch catching the light as he cut his daughter's chicken into smaller pieces. The little girl couldn't have been more than 8 years old, with dark curls escaping from her ponytail and a bright yellow dress that made her look like a ray of sunshine. She was telling her father an animated story, her small hands gesturing wildly as she spoke, and Sophia found herself smiling at the pure joy radiating from the child. The man listened with complete attention, nodding seriously at whatever his daughter was explaining. There was something about the way he focused entirely on the little girl, as if she were the most important person in the world, that made Sophia's chest tighten with unexpected emotion. Her own father had never looked at her that way. He had never looked at her at all, actually, not after her mother's diagnosis made their lives complicated and expensive. She was still watching them when disaster struck. The little girl reached for her apple juice with enthusiasm that exceeded her coordination. The plastic cup tipped, sending a stream of golden liquid across the table and onto her yellow dress. Her face immediately crumpled as she looked down at the growing stain. "I'm sorry, Daddy," the child whispered, her lower lip trembling. "I didn't mean to." Before her father could respond, Derek Martinez appeared at their table like a vulture sensing weakness. At 35, Derek had been the day manager at Romano's for 6 years, and in that time he had perfected the art of making everyone around him miserable. His thinning brown hair was always slightly greasy, and he wore his minor authority like a weapon against anyone he perceived as beneath him. "Look what you've done," Derek said, his voice carrying across the restaurant as he loomed over the little girl. "This is exactly why children shouldn't be allowed to eat without supervision. You've made a mess that my staff will have to clean up, and you've probably ruined that dress permanently." Sophia felt her blood pressure spike as she watched the child shrink back into the booth. The man's entire body had gone rigid, his dark eyes fixed on Derek with an intensity that would have made a smarter person step back and reconsider their approach. But Derek was too busy demonstrating his authority to notice that he was poking a sleeping dragon. "Do you have any idea how much it costs to deep clean these cushions?" Derek continued, gesturing dramatically at the small puddle of juice. "This kind of carelessness is exactly why families with young children should stick to fast food restaurants where this behavior is acceptable." The little girl's eyes filled with tears, and she pressed herself against her father's side as if trying to disappear. "That's my sorry," she whispered again, her voice barely audible. Sophia didn't make a conscious decision to move. One moment she was standing frozen by the kitchen doors, and the next she was crossing the dining room with her cleaning supplies, positioning herself directly between Derek and the terrified child. "Excuse me, Derek, but I think there's been a misunderstanding," Sophia said, her voice steady despite the fact that she was about to commit career suicide. "This little sweetheart had a simple accident." It happens to everyone, including adults. I'll have this cleaned up in 30 seconds, and everything will be perfect. She smiled warmly at the little girl, whose tears had paused in confusion at this unexpected intervention. Accidents happen to me all the time, honey. Just last week I spilled coffee all over myself right before work. Sometimes our hands just don't cooperate with our brains, right? The child nodded tentatively, a tiny smile threatening to break through her distress. Chin, what do you think you're doing? Derek's voice had dropped to a dangerous whisper. I am handling this situation. Return to your assigned tables immediately. Sophia kept her eyes on the little girl as she efficiently soaked up the spilled juice and wiped down the table surface. Actually, Derek, I think the situation is handled. See? Good as new. And sweetie, that yellow dress is absolutely beautiful on you. Yellow is my favorite color because it reminds me of sunshine. This is completely unacceptable, Derek said, his face flushing red with indignation. You do not interfere with management decisions. You do not contradict me in front of customers. And you certainly do not make policy decisions about how we handle disruptive behavior. She wasn't being disruptive, Sophia said quietly, finally looking up at Derek. She's 8 years old and she spilled a cup of juice. That's not disruptive behavior. That's just being 8 years old. The entire restaurant had gone quiet, conversations trailing off as other diners turned to watch the confrontation. Sophia was vaguely aware that her hands were shaking slightly, but she kept her voice calm and professional. She had worked in restaurants long enough to know that Derek's reaction was completely disproportionate, and she had worked in life long enough to know that someone needed to stand up for children who couldn't stand up for themselves. That's it, Derek announced loudly. You're fired. Clean out your locker and get out of my restaurant. Your final paycheck will be mailed to you minus the cost of professional cleaning for this booth. Sophia felt the words hit her like a physical blow. She needed this job desperately. She needed the money, the health insurance, the flexibility to visit her mother during hospital visiting hours. But as she looked at the little girl's wide eyes and her father's face, she realized she couldn't regret her choice. That seems like an extreme reaction to someone doing their job, a voice said quietly. Everyone turned to look at the man in the expensive suit. He had been silent throughout the entire exchange, but now he was standing, and Sophia was struck by just how tall and imposing he actually was. He moved with the fluid confidence of someone accustomed to being the most dangerous person in any room, and when he spoke, his voice carried an authority that made Derek's bluster seem like amateur theatrics. I'm sorry, sir, but this doesn't concern you, Derek said, though his voice had lost some of its earlier confidence. Actually, it concerns me quite a bit, the man replied, his dark eyes never leaving Derek's face. This young woman defended my daughter from your completely inappropriate behavior. She did her job with professionalism and kindness while you chose to bully a child over an accident that required 30 seconds to clean up. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a wallet that was clearly made of leather that cost more than Sophia made in a month. He placed $200 bills on the table, enough to cover their modest meal several times over. The service here has been exceptional, he continued, looking directly at Sophia. Unfortunately, the management has been disappointing. Isabella, sweetheart, are you ready to go? The little girl nodded eagerly, scrambling out of the booth to take her father's offered hand. As they prepared to leave, the man turned back to Derek. I assume you'll be reconsidering your hasty personnel decision, he said conversationally. It would be unfortunate if word spread about how this establishment treats both employees and young customers. There was something in his tone that made Derek's face go pale. The threat was delivered so casually that it almost sounded like friendly advice, but the underlying steel was unmistakable. Sir, I'm sure we can work something out, Derek stammered. There's no need for any misunderstandings to leave this restaurant. Oh, I think the understanding is quite clear, the man replied. Sophia, I believe you said your name was? I'd like to speak with you outside if you have a moment. Sophia looked from Derek's sweating face to the kind stranger who had just upended her entire evening. She was officially unemployed, probably about to be blacklisted from restaurant work in the area, and facing financial disaster. But something about this man's calm confidence made her feel like maybe the disaster might turn into something else entirely. Of course, she said, untying her apron with hands that had stopped shaking. I was just finishing my shift anyway. As they walked toward the exit, she heard Derek's voice calling after them with desperate false cheer, but neither of them looked back. The little girl skipped between them, her earlier distress completely forgotten in the excitement of this unexpected adventure. Outside in the parking lot, Sophia finally allowed herself to process what had just happened. She had lost her job defending a stranger's child, and she had no idea what she was going to do next. Her mother's medical bills weren't going to pay themselves, and the rent was due in 12 days. But as she looked at the little girl's bright smile and felt the weight of her father's grateful attention, she realized she didn't regret a single word she had spoken. The evening air was crisp against Sophia's skin as she stepped into the parking lot, her mind reeling from the events of the last 20 minutes. She had been fired. Actually fired. The reality of it settled over her like a lead blanket as she calculated how many days she could survive on her savings. 12 days until rent was due, and her mother's next treatment was scheduled for Thursday. The panic that had been held at bay by adrenaline began to creep up her throat. The man and his daughter had followed her outside, and now they stood near a gleaming black sedan that probably cost more than Sophia had made in the past 2 years. The vehicle seemed to absorb the light from the parking lot lamps, its pristine surface reflecting the restaurant's neon sign in wavering patterns. I wanted to properly introduce myself, the man said, extending his hand with formal courtesy. Dante Rossetti. And this is my daughter, Isabella. Sophia Chan, she replied, shaking his hand and trying not to notice how warm and strong his fingers felt against hers. And I'm very glad to meet you both, even under these circumstances. Isabella bounced on her toes beside her father, the earlier trauma of the spilled juice completely forgotten in her excitement. You were really brave in there, she announced with the serious tone that children used when delivering important proclamations. Daddy says brave people are the best kind of people. Dante's eyes softened as he looked down at his daughter, and Sophia felt something shift in her chest at the tenderness in his expression. Your daddy is absolutely right, she told Isabella. And you were very brave too. Accidents happen to everyone, and the way you handled it showed real courage. The little girl beamed at the praise, but Sophia couldn't help noticing that Dante was studying her with an intensity that made her suddenly aware of her rumpled uniform and the fact that she probably smelled like marinara sauce and desperation. I owe you a debt, Dante said quietly, his voice carrying a weight that suggested he didn't use those words lightly. What you did in there, defending Isabella, that meant more to me than you could possibly understand. I don't need anything in return, Sophia said quickly. Any decent person would have done the same thing. Derek was completely out of line. Dante tilted his head slightly, as if considering her words. Perhaps. But in my experience, very few people are willing to sacrifice their own security to protect a stranger's child. That kind of character is rare. There was something in the way he spoke that made Sophia suspect he had extensive experience with people who were not willing to make such sacrifices. Everything about him radiated controlled power, from his perfectly pressed suit to the way he held himself with absolute confidence in any situation. She found herself wondering what exactly he did for a living that required such expensive clothes and such careful composure. I appreciate the sentiment, she said, glancing toward the bus stop at the corner of the parking lot. But I should probably head home. I have some phone calls to make tonight. The reality was that she needed to start looking for another job immediately. Restaurant work was competitive, and being fired from Romano's would make finding new employment more difficult. She might have to expand her search to retail or office cleaning, jobs that would pay less and offer fewer opportunities for tips. Actually, Dante said, stepping slightly closer, I was hoping I could speak with you about a proposition. I find myself in need of someone trustworthy to help care for Isabella, and after what I witnessed tonight, I believe you might be exactly what we're looking for. Sophia blinked at him in surprise. I'm sorry, what? A nanny position, Dante clarified. Livian, if you're willing. Isabella needs someone who can pick her up from school, help with homework, prepare meals, and provide general supervision and companionship. The salary would be $5,000 a month, plus room and board, plus health insurance. The numbers hit Sophia like a physical blow. $5,000 a month was more than double what she made at the restaurant, even with tips. Health insurance would mean she could finally see a doctor about the persistent pain in her lower back, and her mother's medications might finally be affordable. But even as her mind raced with the possibilities, warning bells were sounding in the practical part of her brain. Men who wore suits that expensive and drove cars that luxurious didn't hire random waitresses as nannies without serious background checks and references. There had to be a catch, something she wasn't seeing. "That's an incredibly generous offer," she said carefully. "But you don't even know me. You don't know if I'm qualified to care for children, or if I have any experience, or even if I have a criminal record." Dante's smile was slight but genuine. "I'm an excellent judge of character, Sophia. I saw everything I needed to see in that restaurant. You protected my daughter without hesitation, even when it cost you your job. You spoke to her with kindness and respect, treating her like a person rather than a nuisance. And you stood up to authority when that authority was acting inappropriately." He paused, glancing down at Isabella, who was listening to the adult conversation with the intense focused children brought to discussions that might affect their lives. "As for qualifications, Isabella will be the judge of whether you're suitable. Isabella, sweetheart, what do you think about Sophia coming to stay with us and helping Daddy take care of you?" The little girl's face lit up like Christmas morning. "Really? She could live at our house? She could help me with my art projects and maybe braid my hair like she probably knows how to do because hers is so pretty?" Sophia felt her resistance crumbling under the force of Isabella's enthusiasm. The child's genuine excitement was infectious, and the prospect of financial stability was more tempting than she wanted to admit. But there was still the matter of what exactly Dante Rossetti did for a living that allowed him to make such extravagant offers to virtual strangers. "Mr. Rossetti," she said slowly, "I have to ask what kind of work you do. Not because it necessarily matters, but because I'd be living in your home and caring for your daughter. I think it's reasonable for me to have some understanding of what that might entail." Dante's expression became more guarded, though not unfriendly. "That's a fair question. I'm involved in various business interests throughout the city. Import and export, real estate development, entertainment venues. Some of those businesses require me to work irregular hours and occasionally travel. That's part of why Isabella needs consistent care from someone I can trust completely." It was a careful answer, revealing very little while technically responding to her question. Sophia suspected there was significantly more to the story, but she also suspected that pressing for details would end the conversation entirely. Her phone buzzed in her pocket, and she glanced at the screen to see a text from her mother's nurse. The treatment scheduled for Thursday would need to be prepaid by Tuesday, or they would have to reschedule until she could secure the funds. The decision made itself. "I accept," Sophia said quietly. "When would you need me to start?" Dante's smile this time was warm and relieved. "How about tomorrow morning? I can pick you up at 9, you can see the house and meet my housekeeper, and we'll go from there. If everything feels right to everyone involved, you could move in tomorrow evening." Isabella clapped her hands together in delight. "This is the best day ever," she announced. "Well, except for the juice spilling part, but even that turned out good because now Sophia is going to live with us." As Sophia walked to the bus stop 20 minutes later, her head was spinning with the rapid change in her circumstances. 12 hours ago, her biggest concern had been making it through another double shift without collapsing. Now she was about to become the live-in nanny for a mysterious wealthy man and his charming daughter. She was so lost in thought that she almost missed the call. Her phone rang just as the bus pulled up, and she glanced at the screen to see Derek's number. For a moment, she considered ignoring it entirely, but curiosity won out. "Hello, Derek," she said calmly. "What the hell did you do, Chin?" Derek's voice was tight with panic. "Who was that guy? What did you tell him about me?" "I didn't tell him anything about you," Sophia replied truthfully. "I just did my job and protected a child from being bullied by her manager." "Don't play games with me," Derek snarled. "Nobody walks into my restaurant and threatens me unless they have serious connections. What kind of people are you involved with?" "I'm not involved with anyone, Derek. I just met him tonight, same as you." There was a long pause on the other end of the line, and when Derek spoke again, His voice had taken on a different quality. Something cold and calculating. Well, Chun, I hope your new friends are worth it, because you're going to need all the protection you can get. Nobody makes me look like a fool in my own restaurant and walks away without consequences. The line went dead, leaving Sophia staring at her phone with a growing sense of unease. Derek's final words had sounded less like the empty bluster of a humiliated manager and more like a genuine threat. As the bus pulled away from the curb, she found herself looking forward to tomorrow morning in a way that had nothing to do with the generous salary Dante had offered. Something told her that accepting his protection might turn out to be more necessary than she had initially realized. 3 weeks into her new life, Sophia was beginning to understand that Dante Rossetti lived in a world where luxury was simply the baseline rather than an aspiration. The estate sat on 12 acres of perfectly manicured grounds in the hills overlooking the city, with a main house that could have comfortably housed 3 families and a guest cottage that was larger than any apartment Sophia had ever rented. Her mornings had settled into a routine that felt almost surreal in its domestic normalcy. She would wake at 7 in her cottage, shower in a bathroom with heated marble floors, and walk to the main house through gardens that belonged in a magazine spread. By the time she arrived at the kitchen, Dante would already be there, making coffee in an espresso machine that probably cost more than most people's cars. This morning was no different. She found him standing at the massive kitchen island, perfectly dressed in a navy suit despite the early hour, reading something on his phone while the coffee machine hissed and gurgled behind him. "Good morning," she said, accepting the cup he offered her without needing to ask. The man had somehow memorized exactly how she liked her coffee within the first week, and the small gesture of care made her chest tighten with an emotion she wasn't ready to examine too closely. "Morning," he replied, his voice still rough with sleep in a way that made her very aware of how intimate their shared mornings had become. "Isabella's art project is due today. She wanted me to remind you that she needs to present it to the class this afternoon." Sophia smiled at the memory of Isabella's intense focus on her diorama about butterflies, complete with handmade paper wings and a carefully researched explanation of metamorphosis. The little girl had worked on it every evening for a week, tongue poking out in concentration as she painted tiny details. "She's going to do beautifully," Sophia said. "She knows everything there is to know about monarch migration patterns now." Dante's expression softened in the way it always did when they discussed his daughter. "Thank you," he said quietly, "for caring about these things, for making them important." Before Sophia could respond, the sound of small feet thundering down the stairs announced Isabella's arrival. She burst into the kitchen wearing her school uniform but with her dark curls still wild from sleep, clutching her completed diorama like a precious treasure. "Did you remember to pack my presentation notes?" she asked Sophia breathlessly. "And the extra butterfly I made in case something happens to the main ones? And my special pencil for good luck?" "Everything is in your backpack," Sophia assured her, smoothing down the little girl's hair with automatic affection. "And you're going to be amazing because you know your subject better than anyone in your class." As Sophia helped Isabella eat breakfast and gather her school supplies, she was acutely aware of Dante watching them with an expression she couldn't quite interpret. There was something almost hungry in the way he observed their easy interaction, as if he were memorizing every detail of their domestic harmony. Their peaceful morning routine was interrupted by the buzz of Dante's phone. His expression shifted immediately as he read the message, his relaxed demeanor replaced by the controlled alertness that Sophia was beginning to recognize as his business mode. "I need to take this call," he said, already moving toward his office. "Can you handle the school run this morning?" "Of course," Sophia replied, though she noticed the way his shoulders had tensed and the careful way he was avoiding eye contact with Isabella. 20 minutes later, as they drove through the estate's ornate iron gates, Isabella chattered excitedly about her presentation from the back seat. Sophia was only half listening, her attention caught by the black SUV parked across from the gate and the man leaning against its hood. Her blood chilled as she recognized Derek Martinez, still wearing his restaurant manager's uniform and looking significantly less composed than she remembered. His face was flushed, his hair disheveled, and there was something manic in his posture that made alarm bells ring in Sophia's head. "Who is that man?" Isabella asked, following Sophia's gaze. Why is he staring at our car? Just someone from my old job, Sophia said carefully, accelerating past the SUV. Nothing important, sweetheart. But even as she said it, she could see Derek in her rearview mirror, climbing back into his vehicle with jerky, agitated movements. The idea that he had followed her here, that he knew where she was living now, made her stomach clench with anxiety. By the time they returned from Isabella's school, Derek was gone, but Sophia's unease remained. She found Dante in his office, speaking in rapid Italian into his phone, his voice carrying an edge of authority that made it clear he was giving orders rather than having a conversation. When he saw her in the doorway, he concluded the call with a few sharp words and turned his full attention to her. His dark eyes immediately caught the tension in her posture. What's wrong? He asked, rising from behind his massive oak desk. Derek was waiting outside the gates this morning, Sophia said. Just standing there, watching. It felt like he was trying to send some kind of message. Dante's expression went deadly calm in a way that was somehow more frightening than anger would have been. He was here? On my property. Not on the property exactly. Across the street. But yes, he was definitely watching the house. For a long moment, Dante said nothing. When he finally spoke, his voice was soft and conversational, but Sophia could hear the steel underneath. This won't be a problem anymore, he said simply. What does that mean? Sophia asked, though part of her wasn't sure she wanted to know the answer. Dante moved around the desk to stand in front of her, his hands settling gently on her shoulders. It means that you and Isabella are under my protection, and I take that responsibility very seriously. Derek Martinez will understand that he needs to find other ways to spend his time. The way he said it made Sophia suspect that Derek's enlightenment would not be delivered through polite conversation. She found herself torn between relief that someone was finally taking the threat seriously and concern about what methods Dante might employ to resolve the situation. Dante, she said carefully, I need to ask you something, and I need you to be honest with me. He nodded, his hands still warm and steady on her shoulders. What exactly is your family business? Because I'm starting to get the impression that it's not just import and export. Dante's smile was slight and not entirely pleasant. You're very perceptive. My family has been involved in various enterprises for several generations. Some of them operate in areas where traditional business practices aren't always sufficient. We provide protection, resolve disputes, ensure that agreements are honored. He paused, studying her face for her reaction. What some people might call organized crime, though I prefer to think of it as specialized problem solving. We have a code, Sophia. We protect our own, we honor our word, and we don't harm innocents. But we also don't allow threats against our family to go unanswered. Sophia felt the world shift slightly beneath her feet. Part of her had suspected something like this, given the obvious wealth and the careful way Dante spoke about his work. But hearing it confirmed was different from suspecting it. Are you afraid? He asked quietly. She considered the question seriously, examining her own emotions. She should be afraid, she knew. She was living in the home of a man who had just admitted to being involved in organized crime. She was caring for his daughter, becoming integrated into his life, developing feelings that were becoming impossible to ignore. But when she looked at Dante, she didn't see a dangerous criminal. She saw the man who made coffee for her every morning, who listened with complete attention when Isabella told him about her school day, who had stepped in to protect her from Derek's harassment without being asked. No, she said finally. I'm not afraid of you. Maybe I should be, but I'm not. The relief in his expression was unmistakable. Good, he said, because I need you to trust me to handle the Derek situation. Can you do that? Sophia nodded, surprising herself with how easily the agreement came. Yes, I can do that. That evening, as they sat around the dining room table sharing dinner, Sophia found herself studying the man across from her with new eyes. Isabella was telling them about her successful butterfly presentation, complete with dramatic reenactments of her classmates' reactions, and Dante was giving her his complete attention with obvious pride. This was the same man who had calmly informed her that he was involved in organized crime just hours earlier. The same man who had promised to deal with Derek in a way that suggested violence was definitely on the table. But watching him help Isabella cut her chicken and laugh at her silly jokes, it was impossible to reconcile those two versions of him. When Isabella excused herself to get her homework, the adult conversation turned to more serious topics. "How long have you been doing this?" Sophia asked. "The family business, all my life, essentially," Dante replied. "My father brought me into the organization when I was 18. I've been running things since he retired 5 years ago. Do you ever want to do something else?" Dante considered the question seriously. "This is who I am, Sophia. This is how I provide for Isabella, how I protect the people I care about. I'm good at it, and it serves a purpose in the world, even if that purpose isn't always pretty." He paused, his dark eyes meeting hers across the table. "But I will say that having you and Isabella in my life has made me think about things differently, about what kind of legacy I want to leave, what kind of example I want to set." There was something in his voice that made Sophia's heart race. The intensity of his gaze made her feel like he was seeing parts of her that she hadn't shown anyone else. "What about you?" he asked. "Tell me about your family, your father." Sophia's chest tightened at the question. "My father left when I was 16, she said quietly. "My mother was diagnosed with lupus, and the medical bills were overwhelming. He said he hadn't signed up for that kind of responsibility." Dante's expression darkened. "He abandoned you when you needed him most." "Basically, yes. My mother tried to make excuses for him, said he was just scared and overwhelmed. But I learned that when things get difficult, you find out who people really are underneath all the promises they've made." She looked down at her hands, remembering the confusion and betrayal of watching her father pack his belongings, while her mother pleaded with him to stay. "That's why I have a hard time depending on other people," she admitted. "I know what it feels like to have someone you trust just disappear when the situation becomes inconvenient." Dante reached across the table to cover her hand with his. "I'm not going anywhere, Sophia, no matter how complicated things get." The warmth of his touch sent electricity up her arm, and she found herself wondering what it would feel like to really trust someone again. To believe that someone might actually stay when things got difficult instead of looking for the nearest exit. When he helped her clear the dinner dishes, their hands brushed as they reached for the same plate. Instead of the brief, accidental contact she expected, his fingers lingered against hers, warm and sure and deliberate. For a moment, they stood frozen in the kitchen, the simple touch connecting them like a circuit completing. Sophia could feel her pulse hammering in her throat as she looked up into his dark eyes and saw her own desire reflected back at her. Then Isabella's voice called from the living room, asking for help with her math homework, and the moment broke. But as Dante stepped back to give her space, Sophia could still feel the phantom warmth of his touch against her skin. Later that night, as she lay in her cottage trying to process the day's revelations, she realized that her world had shifted completely off its axis. She was falling for a man who lived outside the law, caring for his daughter as if she were her own, and somehow feeling safer than she had in years. It should have been terrifying. Instead, it felt like coming home. The nightmare came for Isabella on Thursday night, 3 days after Derek's appearance at the estate gates. Sophia was in her cottage, reviewing the little girl's homework for the next day, when she heard the crying through the open windows. She didn't hesitate. Within seconds, she was crossing the moonlit garden in her pajamas and bare feet, her heart racing with the kind of maternal panic that had developed over the past month of caring for Isabella. The main house was dark except for a light in the upstairs hallway, and she could hear Dante's voice, low and soothing, as she climbed the stairs. Isabella's bedroom door was open, revealing the little girl curled against her father's chest, tears streaming down her cheeks, as she clutched her favorite stuffed elephant. The sight made Sophia's heart clench with protective tenderness. "Hey, sweetheart," Sophia said softly from the doorway. "What's wrong?" Isabella looked up with red-rimmed eyes, reaching for Sophia with desperate arms. "I had the bad dream again," she whispered. "The one where Mommy's car was spinning and I couldn't make it stop." Sophia exchanged a meaningful look with Dante over Isabella's head. They had talked about the nightmares before, the way Isabella sometimes relived her mother's fatal car accident in her sleep. But this was the first time Sophia had witnessed one directly. "Can I sit with you for a while?" Sophia asked, settling on the bed beside them. Sometimes bad dreams feel smaller when there are more people to help fight them off. For the next hour, they took turns reading to Isabella from her favorite book about a brave princess who befriended dragons. Dante's deep voice alternated with Sophia's softer tones, creating a cocoon of safety around the little girl until her breathing finally evened out in sleep. When they were certain she was resting peacefully, they tiptoed from her room, leaving the door slightly ajar in case she called out again. In the hallway, Sophia became acutely aware that she was wearing nothing but thin cotton pajamas and a robe, and that Dante was in a simple white t-shirt and dark sweatpants that somehow made him look more approachable than his usual expensive suits. "Thank you," he said quietly as they walked toward the stairs. "For coming over. You didn't have to do that." "Yes, I did," Sophia replied without thinking. "She's important to me. When she hurts, I hurt." Dante stopped walking and turned to look at her, something unreadable flickering in his dark eyes. "That means more to me than you know," he said. "Isabella hasn't had a maternal figure in her life since she was 3 years old. Watching you care for her, seeing how naturally you've stepped into that role, it's a gift I never thought we'd receive." They had reached the living room, with its massive windows overlooking the city lights below. Dante moved to the bar cart in the corner, pouring 2 glasses of amber liquid from a crystal decanter that probably cost more than Sophia used to make in 6 months. "Tell me about her mother," Sophia said, accepting the glass and settling into one corner of the leather sofa. "If you want to, you don't have to." Dante sat beside her, close enough that she could smell his cologne, close enough that she was hyper-aware of the warmth radiating from his body. For a long moment he stared into his glass, and Sophia thought he might decline to answer. "Her name was Gabriella," he said finally. "We met when I was 26 and still learning to run the family business. She was a kindergarten teacher, completely outside my world, and I fell for her immediately." His voice carried a wistfulness that made Sophia's chest tighten, with an emotion she didn't want to examine too closely. "She knew what I did for a living, and she hated it. Hated the violence, the danger, the way business could intrude on our personal life at any moment. We fought about it constantly, especially after Isabella was born. Gabriella wanted me to find a way out, to start over somewhere else, and I thought I could protect them both while staying in the life I knew." He took a long sip of his drink, his jaw tightening with remembered pain. "I was wrong. The accident wasn't random, Sophia. It was a message meant for me, delivered through the person I loved most. By the time I eliminated the threat, Gabriella was gone, and Isabella was left without a mother because of choices I made." Sophia felt tears sting her eyes as she processed the depth of his guilt and grief. Without thinking, she reached out to cover his hand with hers, the same gesture he had offered her during dinner the night before. "That wasn't your fault," she said firmly. "You didn't choose to have someone hurt your family. Someone else made that decision. Someone else chose violence." Dante's fingers turned to capture hers, holding her hand like an anchor. "I've spent 5 years believing I was responsible for her death, that loving me was what killed her. And then you came into our lives, and for the first time since Gabriella died, I'm starting to think that maybe some people are worth the risk." The words hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Sophia could feel her heart hammering against her ribs as she looked into his eyes and saw something that looked dangerously like the emotion she had been trying to ignore in herself. "Dante," she whispered, not sure if she was about to encourage him or warn him away. Instead of words, he answered by lifting his free hand to cup her cheek, his thumb tracing the line of her cheekbone with infinite gentleness. The touch sent fire racing through her veins, and she found herself leaning into his palm without conscious thought. "I know this is complicated," he said, his voice rough with restraint. "I know I'm asking you to trust someone whose life comes with dangers that normal people never have to face. But I can't pretend anymore that what I feel for you is just gratitude." Sophia's breath caught as he leaned closer, his intentions clear in the way his gaze dropped to her lips. Every rational part of her mind was screaming warnings about the impossibility of the situation, The danger of falling for a man whose enemies might use her as leverage, the complexity of caring for his child while navigating whatever this was between them. But as his lips brushed against hers, soft and questioning, all of those concerns faded into irrelevance. The kiss was gentle at first, almost hesitant, as if he were giving her time to change her mind. When she kissed him back, her hands fisting in his t-shirt to pull him closer, he deepened the connection with a hunger that had clearly been building for weeks. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Sophia could see her own desire reflected in his dark eyes. But she could also see the restraint there, the way he was holding himself back despite the obvious effort it cost him. "We should probably take this slowly," he said, his forehead resting against hers. "For Isabella's sake, if nothing else. She's been through enough upheaval in her young life." Sophia nodded, though every cell in her body was protesting the distance he was putting between them. "You're right," she managed to say. "We need to be careful." But even as she said it, she knew that the line between employer and employee had been permanently crossed. Whatever happened next, there was no going back to the careful professional distance they had maintained for the past month. The next morning brought a harsh return to reality in the form of a phone call from the hospital. Sophia was making breakfast when her phone rang, and the sound of her mother's nurse speaking in clipped, professional tones immediately set her on edge. "Miss Chun, this is Maria from the oncology unit. Your mother's condition has taken a slight turn, and the doctors would like to see you as soon as possible to discuss adjusting her treatment plan." Sophia's hands were shaking as she ended the call and grabbed her car keys. She found Dante in his office, dressed in another perfectly tailored suit and speaking quietly into his phone in what sounded like Italian mixed with Russian. "I need to go to the hospital," she said from the doorway. "My mother." Dante immediately ended his call and stood, his expression shifting to concern. "What happened?" "I don't know yet. They just said I need to come in to discuss her treatment." "Could you handle getting Isabella to school?" "I'm sorry to ask. But, don't apologize," Dante interrupted, already moving toward the door. "Do you want me to drive you? Or have someone else take you?" "I can drive myself," Sophia said, though she appreciated the offer more than she could express. 3 hours later, after a marathon session with doctors who used words like aggressive treatment and increased monitoring, Sophia finally emerged from the hospital feeling emotionally drained and financially terrified. The new treatment protocol would cost nearly twice as much as the current one, and even with her generous salary from Dante, the numbers were daunting. She was so lost in worried calculations that she almost didn't notice Derek Martinez until he was directly in front of her in the hospital parking lot. He looked even worse than he had at the estate gates, his uniform wrinkled and stained, his eyes red-rimmed with exhaustion or substances or both. Well, Derek said, his voice carrying a nasty satisfaction. "Fancy meeting you here, Chin. How's your sick mommy doing?" "Derek," Sophia said carefully, taking a step back toward the hospital entrance. "What are you doing here?" "Just keeping an eye on my former employee," Derek replied, moving to block her path. "Making sure she's not getting too comfortable in her new life. You know, I've been doing some research on your boyfriend, and I think you should be more careful about the company you keep." There was something in his tone that made Sophia's skin crawl. "I don't know what you think you've found out, but it's none of your business." Derek's smile was ugly and triumphant. "Oh, I think it is my business. See, when someone humiliates me and costs me my job, it becomes very much my business. Your mafia boyfriend might think he can scare me, but I've got friends too. Friends who don't appreciate wise guys moving into their territory." The threat was clear, and Sophia felt ice forming in her veins, as she realized that Derek's harassment had escalated far beyond the petty revenge of a fired manager. He was talking like someone who had made dangerous allies, someone who was planning retaliation on a scale that went far beyond vandalism or intimidation. "Stay away from me, Derek," she said firmly, "and stay away from my family." "Or what?" Derek asked, stepping closer. "You'll have your boyfriend send some thugs to convince me? I'm not as easy to intimidate as you might think." Before Sophia could respond, 2 large men in dark suits appeared on either side of Derek, moving with the silent efficiency of professionals. Derek's face went pale as he realized he was suddenly outnumbered and outmatched. Mr. Rossetti thought you might appreciate an escort to your car, one of the men said to Sophia, his voice polite but his eyes never leaving Derek's face. As she walked to her vehicle under their protection, Sophia could hear Derek's voice behind her, high with panic and anger, making threats that sounded increasingly desperate and unhinged. By the time she reached her car, she was shaking with adrenaline and the realization that whatever this conflict was becoming, it was far more serious than she had initially understood. When she arrived back at the estate, Dante was waiting for her in the kitchen, his expression grim but relieved when he saw her safely home. "I should have insisted on sending protection with you this morning," he said. "I didn't think Derek would be stupid enough to confront you at a hospital." "How did you know?" Sophia asked. "I have people who keep an eye on potential threats," Dante replied. "Derek Martinez has been busy making new friends in the past week, and those friends represent the kind of problem that needs to be handled decisively." As Sophia processed the implications of living in a world where protection and surveillance were simply routine precautions, she realized that she was no longer just Dante's employee, or even just the woman he was interested in romantically. She had become part of his world in a way that made her both protected and potentially vulnerable. That night, as Isabella slept peacefully in her bed, Sophia lay awake staring at the cottage ceiling and wondering if she was brave enough to choose a love that came with bodyguards and enemies and the constant possibility of violence. When her phone buzzed at 2 in the morning with a text from an unknown number containing a picture of her mother's hospital room and a message reading, "Pretty flowers. Be a shame if something happened to them," she realized the choice might no longer be hers to make. Sophia didn't sleep after receiving the threatening text about her mother. She sat in her cottage kitchen until dawn, staring at the photograph of her mother's hospital room and feeling the walls of her new safe world crumbling around her. By the time Dante knocked on her door at 6 in the morning, still dressed in yesterday's clothes and looking like he hadn't slept either, she had made her decision. "We need to stop him," she said without preamble when she opened the door. "Derek isn't going to leave us alone, and now he's threatening my mother. I can't live like this, Dante. I can't spend every day wondering if the people I love are safe." Dante stepped inside, his dark eyes immediately cataloging the stress in her posture, the way her hands shook slightly as she showed him the text message. When he read it, his expression went deadly calm in a way that would have terrified her a month ago. Now it just made her feel protected. "This ends today," he said quietly. "I should have handled this the first time he made contact. I was trying to be measured to avoid escalation, but Derek has made it clear that restraint isn't a language he understands." Sophia felt a rush of relief so intense it made her knees weak. For weeks, she had been carrying the weight of Derek's harassment alone, trying to convince herself it would eventually fade if she just ignored it. Having Dante finally agree to take decisive action felt like setting down a burden she hadn't realized was crushing her. "What does that mean exactly?" she asked. "What happens to him?" Dante moved closer, his hands settling on her shoulders in the gesture that had become familiar between them. "It means he won't be able to threaten you or your mother or anyone else ever again. It means you'll be safe, Sophia. I promise you that." There was something in his voice, a finality that suggested Derek's options for redemption had just expired permanently. A month ago, the implications might have horrified her. Now, after weeks of escalating threats and the sight of that photograph of her vulnerable mother, she felt nothing but gratitude. "Thank you," she whispered, and then she was kissing him with all the desperation and relief and fear she had been holding inside. This kiss was nothing like the gentle exploration they had shared the night before. This was raw need and the acknowledgement that they were past the point of pretending their feelings were casual or containable. Dante responded with matching intensity, his arms wrapping around her to pull her against his chest, as if he could absorb her fear and desperation into himself. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, his forehead rested against hers. "I love you," he said simply. "I know it's too soon and too complicated and too dangerous, but I love you, Sophia. I love your courage and your kindness and the way you protect the people you care about even when it costs you everything." The words hit her like a physical blow, not because they were unwelcome, but because they crystallized everything she had been feeling but hadn't dared to name. She loved him too, loved his gentleness with Isabella, loved the way he had stepped into her life like a shield against all the things that threatened to destroy her peace. "I love you too," she replied, the words feeling both terrifying and inevitable. "I love you and Isabella and this life we've built together, and I'm tired of letting Derek poison it with his threats and his anger." This time when Dante kissed her, it was with the slow thoroughness of a man who had just received an unexpected gift. His hands tangled in her hair, and she could feel the restraint he had been maintaining for weeks finally beginning to crack. "Are you sure?" he asked against her lips, his voice rough with want but his eyes still careful, still giving her space to change her mind. "I'm sure," she whispered, and meant it completely. He lifted her easily, carrying her to the bedroom with the careful reverence of a man who understood exactly how precious the trust she was offering him really was. What followed was tender and passionate and entirely focused on connection rather than mere physical release. Dante worshipped her body with the same intensity he brought to everything else in his life, but always with careful attention to her responses, always making sure she was with him every step of the way. Afterwards, as they lay tangled together in the early morning light, Sophia felt a peace she hadn't experienced since childhood. For the first time in years, she wasn't worried about money or threats or the future. She was simply present in the moment, safe in the arms of a man who loved her and would protect her with everything he had. The peace lasted exactly until Dante's phone rang at 8:30. He answered with the clipped professionalism he used for business calls, but Sophia could see his expression darkening as he listened to whoever was speaking. When he ended the call, his jaw was tight with anger. "Derek escalated," he said grimly. "He contacted the Kozlov organization, offered them information about my operations in exchange for backing against me. They're considering the proposal." Sophia didn't need an explanation of why this was catastrophic. Even with her limited knowledge of Dante's world, she understood that rival criminal organizations didn't make alliances lightly, and Derek's inside information about their personal lives could be devastatingly valuable to Dante's enemies. "So what do we do?" she asked. "We eliminate the threat before it can fully develop," Dante replied, already reaching for his clothes. "I need to call a meeting with my people, coordinate a response that handles both Derek and sends a clear message to the Kozlovs that this kind of interference won't be tolerated." Sophia sat up in bed, pulling the sheet around herself. "I want to help." Dante paused in the middle of buttoning his shirt, his expression shifting to something that was part protection and part panic. "Absolutely not. This isn't something you can be involved in, Sophia. It's too dangerous, and Derek specifically targeted you. You need to stay here where you're protected." "No," Sophia said firmly. "I'm not going to hide in this house while you handle my problem for me. Derek became your enemy because of me, because I couldn't handle my own situation. I should be part of the solution." The argument might have continued, but it was interrupted by another phone call. This one to Sophia's phone. The number was blocked, but she answered anyway, somehow knowing that whatever Derek had planned was about to unfold. "Hello, Chun." Derek's voice was manic with triumph. "I hope you enjoyed your night with your boyfriend, because it's going to be your last peaceful one for a long time." "Derek, what do you want?" Sophia asked, motioning for Dante to listen. "What I want is for you to understand that actions have consequences," Derek replied. "Your mafia boyfriend thinks he can intimidate me, but I've been busy making new friends. Friends who are very interested in taking him down a few pegs." Derek's voice took on a sing-song quality that made Sophia's skin crawl. "So here's what's going to happen. You're going to meet me at Riverside Park in 2 hours. Alone. No bodyguards, no boyfriend, no backup. Just you and me having a little chat about respect and consequences." "And if I don't come?" Sophia asked, though she was already dreading the answer. "Well," Derek said with false cheer, "I suppose your mother might have some unfortunate complications with her treatment. Hospital equipment malfunctions all the time, and sometimes the staff just can't respond quickly enough to help poor patients in distress." The threat was crystal clear, and Sophia felt the blood drain from her face, as she realized Derek had moved far beyond harassment into genuine terrorism. He wasn't just threatening her anymore. He was willing to murder her mother to make a point about his wounded pride. 2 hours, Derek repeated. Riverside Park, by the old gazebo. Come alone or your mother dies today. The line went dead, leaving Sophia and Dante staring at each other in the sudden silence. The careful plans for handling Derek systematically had just become an immediate crisis with her mother's life hanging in the balance. I have to go, Sophia said quietly. Like hell you do, Dante replied, his voice sharp with protective fury. This is exactly what he wants, Sophia. He's trying to isolate you so he can use you as leverage against me. We call the hospital, increase security around your mother, and handle Derek through proper channels. There isn't time, Sophia said desperately. You don't understand how vindictive he is, how far he's willing to go to hurt me. He's already threatened her directly. If I don't show up, he'll kill her just to prove he can. Dante's hands clenched into fists at his sides, his entire body radiating frustrated anger at a situation that couldn't be solved through his usual methods. Finally, he looked at her with grim determination. Fine, he said, but we do this my way. You go to the meeting, but you're not going alone no matter what Derek thinks. And Sophia? This ends today permanently. Derek Martinez has made his last threat against anyone I love. As they dressed quickly and began making preparations for what could only be described as a trap, Sophia realized that their morning of peaceful intimacy had been the calm before a storm that would change everything. By the end of the day, either Derek would be permanently silenced, or they would all be dealing with consequences that could destroy the family they had built together. But as she watched Dante coordinate with his security team with calm efficiency, she felt no regret about the choice they were making. Derek had pushed them past the point where peaceful resolution was possible. Now it was time to end this, whatever the cost. Riverside Park at 10 in the morning was nearly deserted, with only a few joggers and dog walkers scattered across the sprawling green space. Sophia walked toward the old gazebo with measured steps, her heart hammering against her ribs as she scanned the area for any sign of Derek or his backup. She knew Dante's security team was positioned throughout the park, invisible but ready, but the knowledge did little to calm her nerves. Derek was waiting for her by the gazebo, and Sophia was shocked by his deteriorated appearance. He looked like he hadn't slept or changed clothes in days, his hair greasy and unkempt, his eyes bloodshot with exhaustion or drugs or both. When he saw her approaching, his face twisted into a triumphant sneer. Well, Chin. I have to admit, I wasn't sure you'd actually show up. Thought your boyfriend might convince you to hide behind his muscle instead of facing me like an adult. I'm here, Derek. What do you want? Sophia kept her voice steady despite the fear crawling up her spine. What I want is an apology, Derek said, circling around her with manic energy. I want you to admit that you cost me everything when you decided to play hero for some mafia brat. I want you to understand that actions have consequences. I'm sorry you lost your job, Sophia said carefully. But you lost your job because you bullied a child, not because I protected her. Those were your choices, Derek. Derek's face flushed with rage. My choices? My choices were to maintain order in my restaurant. Your choice was to humiliate me in front of customers and staff, and then to run straight to Daddy Warbugs to get me blacklisted from every decent restaurant in the city. Sophia felt a chill as she realized Derek's grasp on reality had slipped even further than she had feared. He had constructed an elaborate narrative where he was the victim, where her protection of Isabella had been a calculated attack against him personally. I never asked Dante to do anything to you, she said. I didn't even know who he was when I defended Isabella. Derek laughed, a harsh sound that carried across the empty park. You expect me to believe that? You expect me to believe it was just coincidence that you happened to defend the daughter of one of the most powerful crime bosses in the city? It was coincidence, Derek. I would have done the same thing for any child being treated that way. Derek stopped pacing and turned to face her directly, his eyes wild with paranoid rage. You know what I think? I think you were working for him all along. I think this whole thing was a setup designed to get me out of the way so your boyfriend could move his operations into my neighborhood. The accusation was so divorced from reality that Sophia felt momentarily speechless. Derek had apparently convinced himself that she was some kind of criminal mastermind rather than simply a waitress who had acted on basic human decency. Derek, That's not what happened, she said gently, as if speaking to a dangerous mental patient. I was just trying to do my job and protect a little girl who was being hurt by someone bigger and stronger than her. Don't lie to me, Derek screamed, his voice echoing across the park. I know what you are. I know what he is. And I know that people like you think you can destroy people like me without consequences. He reached into his jacket, and Sophia's blood turned to ice as she saw the flash of metal. The gun looked enormous in Derek's shaking hands, and she realized that his mental breakdown had progressed to the point where violence seemed like a rational solution to his problems. Derek, please, she said, raising her hands slowly. Put the gun down. You don't want to do this. Yes, I do, Derek replied, his voice suddenly calm in a way that was more terrifying than his screaming had been. I really, really do. Because if I can't have my life back, then you can't have yours either. And when your boyfriend finds your body, he'll understand that some people don't back down just because they wear expensive suits. The sound of slow clapping echoed across the park, and Derek spun around to see Dante walking toward them with the casual confidence of a man who owned everything he could see. He was flanked by two men in dark suits, but his attention was focused entirely on Derek with an intensity that made the air itself seem dangerous. Impressive speech, Derek, Dante said conversationally. Very dramatic. Unfortunately, you've made a few critical errors in your planning. Derek swung the gun toward Dante, his hands shaking so badly that Sophia wondered if he could hit anything even if he pulled the trigger. Stay back, Derek shouted. This is between me and her. Actually, it stopped being between you and her the moment you threatened my family. Dante replied, still walking forward as if Derek weren't armed and desperate. It became between you and me when you decided to involve rival organizations in your petty revenge fantasies. And it became a death sentence when you threatened an innocent child and an elderly woman in a hospital bed. Derek's face went pale as he realized that Dante wasn't showing any fear or concern about the weapon pointed at him. The other men had fanned out in a careful pattern that Sophia recognized as a tactical formation designed to eliminate any chance of Derek's escape. I'll shoot her, Derek screamed, swinging the gun back toward Sophia. I'll kill her right now if you don't back off. No, Dante said with absolute certainty. You won't. The shot came from Derek's left, fired by one of Dante's security team with professional precision. Derek dropped immediately, the gun skittering across the concrete as he clutched his shoulder and screamed in pain and shock. Within seconds, Dante's men had secured the weapon and were efficiently restraining Derek, whose threats had dissolved into whimpering pleas for mercy. Dante finally reached Sophia, his hands immediately checking her for injuries with gentle thoroughness. Are you hurt? He asked, his voice tight with suppressed emotion. I'm fine, Sophia said, though she was shaking with adrenaline and delayed fear. Is he going to live? Unfortunately for him, yes, Dante replied grimly. But Derek Martinez will never threaten anyone again. I can promise you that. As the security team efficiently cleaned up the scene and made Derek's legal problems disappear through methods Sophia preferred not to examine too closely, she found herself thinking about how completely her world had changed in the space of 6 weeks. She had gone from struggling waitress to protected family member of one of the city's most powerful men, and the transition had involved more violence and danger than she could have imagined. But as she watched Dante coordinate the aftermath with calm efficiency, she realized she felt no regret about the path that had led her here. Derek had made his choices, escalating from petty harassment to attempted murder, and the consequences he was facing were entirely of his own making. That evening, after Derek had been permanently removed as a threat and additional security had been arranged for Sophia's mother, they gathered in Dante's living room for what felt like the first peaceful family dinner they had shared in weeks. Isabella chattered happily about her day at school, completely unaware of the drama that had unfolded while she was safely in class. As they tucked Isabella into bed together, the little girl looked up at them with sleepy contentment. Sophia, she said seriously, are you going to marry Daddy and be my mommy for real? The question hung in the air like a challenge, and Sophia felt her heart stop as she looked from Isabella's hopeful face to Dante's carefully neutral expression. That's a very important question, sweetheart, Sophia said carefully. What would you think about that if it happened? I think it would be perfect, Isabella announced with 80-year-old certainty. You already take care of me like a mommy, and you make Daddy smile more than he used to. And then we could be a real family and nobody could ever make you go away. Out of the mouths of babes, Dante said quietly after Isabella had drifted off to sleep. Later, as they sat on the terrace overlooking the city lights, Dante took Sophia's hands in his and looked into her eyes with an expression that made her breath catch. I know we've only known each other for 6 weeks, he said. I know this world is dangerous and complicated and nothing like the life you probably imagined for yourself. But Isabella's right. I want you to be part of our family permanently. I want to marry you, Sophia. I want to wake up next to you every morning and know that you're mine and I'm yours and nobody can ever threaten that. He reached into his jacket and withdrew a small velvet box that made Sophia's heart race even faster. I know it's fast, he continued. I know it seems impossible. But I've learned that life is fragile and unpredictable. And when you find something real, something worth protecting, you don't waste time second-guessing it. The ring was perfect, a classic solitaire that caught the light like captured starfire. But what made Sophia's eyes fill with tears was the way Dante was looking at her. As if she were the answer to prayers he hadn't even known he was making. Yes, she whispered, then louder, yes, of course yes. When he slipped the ring onto her finger and kissed her with passionate relief, Sophia realized that she had found something she hadn't even been looking for. She had found home, not in a place but in a person, not in safety but in love that was worth any risk. The wedding 3 months later was a small, elegant affair held in Dante's garden, with Isabella serving as flower girl and maid of honor simultaneously. Sophia's mother, finally stable on her new treatment protocol, cried tears of joy as she watched her daughter marry the man who had not only saved her life, but had given her a family she had never dared to hope for. As they exchanged vows under an arch of white roses, Sophia thought about the chain of events that had brought them together. Derek's cruelty to a child had revealed both their characters in a moment of crisis, and that revelation had led to a love neither of them had expected. 18 months later, Sophia woke to the sound of Isabella's laughter echoing from the kitchen, followed by Dante's deeper chuckle and the unmistakable sound of something being knocked over. She smiled as she placed her hands on her rounded belly, feeling their baby's responding kick at the familiar sounds of their chaotic, loving family. She found them in the kitchen, where Dante was attempting to make pancakes while Isabella offered helpful commentary on his technique. Flour dusted every available surface, and there was what appeared to be batter on the ceiling. But both father and daughter looked deliriously happy with their culinary adventure. Good morning, beautiful, Dante said, wrapping his arms around her from behind and resting his hands over hers on her belly. How are you feeling? Perfect, Sophia replied, and meant it completely. Isabella bounded over to press her ear to Sophia's stomach, a morning ritual that never failed to make them all smile. The baby kicked me, she announced with delight. I think it wants pancakes too. As they settled around the kitchen table for their characteristically messy breakfast, Sophia reflected on how dramatically her life had changed. She had started as a struggling waitress defending a stranger's child, and now she was a protected wife and mother, surrounded by the unconditional love of a family that would move heaven and earth to keep her safe. Sometimes life hands you exactly what you need in the most unexpected packages. Sometimes standing up for what's right in a moment of crisis changes everything that follows. Have you ever had a moment like that? A single decision that completely redirected your life? Share your story in the comments below, because sometimes the most beautiful love stories begin with the simplest act of courage. Derek Martinez had spent the last 18 months in a secure facility where his mental health issues were being addressed professionally and permanently. His threats against innocent families had ended the day he chose to point a gun at the woman Dante loved, and the consequences of that choice would follow him for the remainder of his significantly shortened life expectancy. But in the sunlit kitchen of their family home, surrounded by laughter and love and the promise of their growing family, Sophia rarely thought about Derek anymore. She was too busy living the life that his moment of cruelty had inadvertently given her, too grateful for the unexpected gift of love that had grown from the simplest decision to protect a child who needed defending. As Dante reached across the table to take her hand, his wedding ring catching the morning light, Sophia smiled at the memory of that first night in Romano's restaurant. She had risked everything to defend Isabella, never imagining that the little girl's father would become her everything. Sometimes the best stories begin with a single moment of courage, and sometimes protecting others leads to finding exactly the protection you never knew you needed.